I am not surprised that one of the top viewed videos on this channel is about quitting jobs. If you are anything like me, you've probably had a lot of jobs and you've quit a lot of jobs. Because if you have ADHD or you're just a multi-potentialite, then your brain is wired for novelty, which means it doesn't want to stay at a job for your entire life. It probably doesn't even want to stay at a job longer than a year or two. And I actually got a lot of spicy feedback on that video. Here's why. Because in my view, the sooner we accept that that is the way that our brain is wired, and that is not a moral failing, and we're not lazy or afraid of commitment, our brains just operate differently than the neurotypical brain. And the sooner we can accept that about ourselves, the sooner we can ditch the shame and start moving in a direction that serves us. And I understand why people would bristle against that perspective, because even though it's not a moral failing, it's just the way our brains are wired, it's also contrary to deeply ingrained cultural norms because our culture celebrates consistency and staying at things for the long term and trucking it out because that means you care and you're a solid person. But is that really true? The nature of work is changing. The nature of who we work with and how we work and the structure of industry in general. Everything's being disrupted. AI is moving things in a direction where if you can't continue to evolve and change, then you're going to be limited to those industries that are very standard and never change. And for some people, that's great. But for those of us with ADHD that like to move around, this is good news because we are primed for the future of work. However, that cultural narrative has not yet caught up with the realities of work, and you can tell by reading the comments on that video I just mentioned. Now, that is the big picture view of my opinion, and I will die on that hill. However, I also understand that job hopping and impulsively quitting and or getting fired from jobs can wreak havoc in our personal lives and in our financial situation. Trust me when I say I am not overlooking that fact because I lived through it. My finances used to be more of a mess than my resume was. So I'm not overlooking that fact. But the one thing I will say, by some miracle, I recognized this about myself early on. And subconsciously, I knew that if I were going to be somebody who needed to change my environment, my job situation a lot, then it would be smart for me to make life choices that align to that flexibility, meaning making the conscious choice to not have children so I didn't have that financial burden, which gave me the opportunity to explore different things. It also influenced where I lived and how I live and the choices I made financially in order to give myself enough freedom and flexibility to honor my own urges. Now, I don't know where that wisdom came from, but I'm so glad I made those choices. And if you are young enough that I can influence you to think about your life in that perspective, then great. But if, like me, you are now a seasoned adult, then you've probably made some life choices that have not served that tendency about yourself until today, because now you have that awareness about yourself and you can start to move in a better direction moving forward. I have said this before and I will say it again because this is the mission behind this channel. The world was not made for ADHDers, so we need to bend it in our direction. And this is the perfect example of that. So stick around because today we're going to talk about how to choose a career path that honors this tendency of ours to want to job hop. So let's get started as though this is a coaching session. I'm the coach and you're the coachee, and you're coming to me because you're struggling with this tendency to job hopping and the impacts it's having on your life. And what I'm going to do as your coach is ask you a series of questions to guide your thinking in a new way where you're not so mired on the problem and you can take a step back and start dreaming up solutions. Because if there's one thing our brains are great at, it's divergent thinking and seeking out patterns and coming up with creative solutions. So let's get to it. And if you want to reference these questions after the video, you can find them in the download below. Just click the link and you will get access to a Google Doc that has all of the questions listed out so you can reflect on them at your own pace. Let's start from the perspective that we have done the work to release the shame around our job hopping tendencies. Whatever choices we've made in the past has no reflection on the choices we will make in the future. So grab a piece of paper and a pen, and in the left column, I want you to write down the last 5 to 10 jobs that you had. And then beside each job, I want you to write down the answer to this question. At what point in each of those roles did the urge to quit first come up? Think about what happened at that time. Was there something that triggered the urge, or did it just bubble up from nowhere? What were the feelings that you were feeling at that point? Were you overwhelmed, stressed out? Maybe you were worried that you couldn't do the job. Was it imposter syndrome? Or were you just really bored? Think about what the emotion and the triggers were in each of those jobs when you first decided to quit, and how long were you in each role before that urge came up. Now I want you to think about the job where you stayed the longest. Maybe it's one of those past 5 to 10 jobs that you've listed down, or maybe it was something much earlier in your career, but think about that job for a second. What made you stay in that job as long as you did? Was it because you loved the people, the work? Was it because it was in an area that you found interesting? Or maybe it was that you enjoyed the way you worked and the environment you were in. Maybe you were at home, or maybe you were always on the road. What was it that kept you in that job? Take some time to really analyze that, because it can inform the decisions you make going forward, so that you either find a career that better suits your need for novelty, or you find a career that you love so much that you never want to leave. There's no good or bad answer here. You just want to be more self-aware about your behaviors and choices in the roles that you're in. Now, the last part of this reflective piece is to think about how you showed up for each of those jobs that you listed. Now, what I mean by that is, when you were in that role, were you genuinely interested in doing a good job, or were you just kind of dialing it in for the paycheck? No judgment here. We've all had moments where we've coasted in jobs, and we've all had moments where we busted our ass. What were you doing in each of those jobs? And how did the way you show up impact your job? Once you've done that, look at your responses. Is there a pattern there? I often find that there's 2 common narratives that people have when they look back at their work experience and not felt good about it. The first narrative is the victim mindset, where you always tried your best, but you had a crappy boss, or the company was horrible. It was never your fault. You were always there doing your best you could, but the world around you was just out to get you. Or the other narrative I hear is the imposter syndrome narrative, where you tried your best, but you were never good enough. And you could just sense that people were waiting for you to fail, and it made you so stressed out and nervous that you just had to leave. Do either of those narratives look familiar to what you have just written down? If it does, then that might tell you something about how you're showing up in your role and the stories you're telling yourself that are not serving you. And it can be helpful to work through that with a coach or a therapist, because those stories will continue to show up in every job that you have going forward. So if you have figured that out about yourself, congratulations. You now have something tangible that you can work on that will benefit your future self. Now let's get into the fun part and turn the page towards the future. I want you to grab your piece of paper and pen, or the worksheet provided, and start answering the following questions. First of all, what field of work sounds most compelling and interesting to you? So I'm not talking about roles here. I'm talking about fields or topics like technology or healthcare. Think about the industry or topic that appeals to you the most. Now I want you to think about what you value the most, especially when it comes to working. I know your mind probably immediately goes to, well, I want to make money. And that is a very important thing. But think about work more broadly. Do you value making a difference in people's lives? Do you value connecting with other people, or time independence, or being outside, or being in a different place every day? Like, do you value novelty, or do you value knowing exactly what to expect? Think about the things that truly matter to you, because this is a big piece of picking the line of work that's going to feel most gratifying to you. Now think about your strengths. What are you really good at? What's easy for you? What is the things that seem so easy for you that is just second nature and doesn't drain your energy? And on that note, what lights you up? What gives you energy? What do you enjoy doing? What do you look forward to? What are the things that you don't procrastinate on? Another thing to consider is where your attention is naturally drawn to. As ADHDers, we don't often have control over that, but get curious about where your attention does go? What are the things that you love to learn about that you could never get bored of learning new things about? And finally, write down all of the topics that you gravitate to when you're listening to a podcast or you're choosing a book. Who do you follow on social media? What are the topics that they talk about? All of these questions will give you a very good indication of your passions and your interests and the things that you naturally are going to do really well at. And these are the places where you want to start. Now we go to the fun stuff and we turn the page towards the future and start envisioning the perfect career path for us. So grab that paper and pen again. Imagine yourself in the perfect work situation where you love what you're doing and you couldn't imagine doing anything else. My first question is, are you building something or are you maintaining it? Very often, ADHDers love to build and create things, but once it gets to about 80% completion, they get bored of it and they never want to see it again. And sometimes that's what inspires the job hopping. However, if you were in a project-based job or just building things that somebody else maintained, would that be a better fit for you? Once you've clarified that, let's come back to the perfect role that you're in and ask yourself, are you coming up with the work that you're doing every day, meaning that you have self-directed work and autonomy in the things that you're doing from moment to moment? Or is somebody else giving you the work that you need to do in the day? And you get to decide how and when you do it, but the work is determined by somebody else. And the thing I want you to think about especially here is how comfortable you are with ambiguity. If you're somebody who loves self-directed work and has no problem with ambiguity, that's something that's really good to know about yourself. However, if you don't like that ambiguity and you don't like having to come up with the work on your own, then you're probably somebody who prefers to work as a part of a team. You may not necessarily want to collaborate with the team very much. You might like to do your work on your own, but you prefer not to spend your energy thinking about what the next steps are. You just want to get right down to work. Now let's come back to that perfect role again and think about your interaction with other people. Do you get energy from being around other people and collaborating with them, or does that drain you? Do you love being on meetings? Does that give you clarity and confidence, or does it drain your energy and make you want to take a nap? A lot of these things have to do with introversion versus extroversion, but it also has to do with your environment and under what circumstances are you best able to focus and get things done. And the last thing I would encourage you to think about is what brings satisfaction to you in terms of work. Do you like appreciation? Do you like money? Do you like notoriety? Do you like being seen and celebrated? Or do you just get appreciation from seeing other people thrive? There is no right or wrong answer here. It's just understanding what lights you up and what feeds your energy as opposed to draining it. Now, if you take the time to answer those questions and really reflect on them, then you have in front of you a very powerful roadmap in terms of what you should be looking for in future roles. And of course, that might mean that you continue to cycle through jobs at a very fast rate because you now understand that that is what you need in particular. But hopefully you also gain some insights into the style of work that you like to do. And maybe the jobs that you've had in the past have just not given you the right environment to thrive and want to stay longer, but in the future, you can look for that. Now that you have all of those insights written down, you actually have a roadmap to start thinking about what it is you want to do in the future. And this can be a very powerful thing because we spend the majority of our lives working. So it's so important that we're choosing to do things that we're interested in, that work with our strengths and our natural inclinations. Those are the things that are going to feed our energy and keep us excited to do work, whether we stay in the same job or not. And as ADHDers, if we don't do things that interest us, we are always going to struggle. And I don't want that for any of us. So give yourself permission to think creatively about everything that you wrote down. Look for intersections and patterns and possibilities on small next steps. You don't have to blow up the career you have now, but you can start to think about how these will inform your next steps when you're ready to take them. And it'll also help you understand when you're ready to move on to a new role or when you're just struggling with an emotion that feels uncomfortable in the moment and you don't want to be impulsive about making choices based on that momentary emotion. When I did this work for myself, it didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. I've always been passionate about psychology. I have 2 psychology degrees. I've always been interested in personal growth and just human development in general. And I always thought that coaching would be a compelling career, but I knew for me, I didn't want to just be a life coach. That didn't feel right. So it wasn't until ADHD came on my radar and I learned about ADHD coaching that I was like, oh my God, the stars aligned. And the funny thing is that as I look back across my very spotty career history, I can see how all of the steps make sense and somehow lead up to what I'm doing today. I think it was Steve Jobs who said that you can only connect the dots looking backwards and things start to make sense in retrospect. And that is 100% true in my case. But it also continues to evolve. When I think about YouTube and my podcast, I only started those things to promote my coaching business. And it turns out that I love being a YouTuber and a podcaster as much as I love the coaching work itself. And that shouldn't surprise me because I spent the majority of my professional career in communications, but I never loved the topics that I was communicating on. Now that I've found the topic that I could speak about endlessly because it is part of who I am, I literally couldn't imagine a better job for me. It aligns to my values. It serves the way I want to work in terms of on my own timeline, showing up when I feel like I have the energy to do so, and not feeling compelled to work when I don't have the energy to do so or don't feel creative. It's pants optional, which is very important to me, meaning that I don't need to go anywhere to perform my work. I can do it wherever I am. And by the way, I'm in an Airbnb right now, so pardon the bland background, but these are the things that are really important to me. And I have found that, and I know that if I can find it, you can find it, and probably a lot faster than I found it. So here's where I want to end things off. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. As ADHDers, we have to give ourselves permission to move in the direction of our interests. Because if we don't, it's an uphill battle and we're more likely to fail, poop out, or drop it and move on to something else. But when we give ourselves that permission, the sky is literally the limit. And we can do so many great things. So don't sleep on this exercise. Really think through what's most important to you. And yeah, you could probably Google the best jobs for ADHDers. And I could tell you right now, it's going to be things like hairdresser, journalist, emergency room doctor. And I could tell you straight up, none of those things would appeal to me. So do the work to truly understand who you are and what lights you up. And you will find the work that you're meant to do. But I will warn you, if you do find the work you love, you may never want to leave it, or at least not for a very long time. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Again, the worksheet with all of the questions I just asked you are linked below in the description. So go grab that, spend some time thinking about your best career. And on that note, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.